name is Faisa Aiden, and for my persuasive speech today, I'm going to be talking about how the prison industrial complex is a reborn form of slavery, especially for communities of color. For us to even begin discussing these concepts, we need to do a quick review of what prisons are today. Defined by Google, prisons are buildings in which people are legally held for a crime they have committed or while awaiting trial. While this may seem like a concept that is understandable and necessary for a nation that houses 25% of the global world prison population, some things are just not adding up. These discrepancies, which include demographics of people within prison, racial bias in our policing system, and the political influences of private companies and businesses that supply goods and services to government prison agencies for profit, all show that prison is in fact a form of slavery, and here's how. To understand prisons now, we need to understand prisons then first. According to prison history, the earliest record of prison come from the first millennia BC, located on the areas of mighty civilization, Mesopotamia, Egypt. During those times, prisons were almost always stationed in underground dungeons where guilty or suspected criminals spent their life either awaiting death or a command to become slaves. The age of modern prisons that we know today started with several prison reform in the 19th century in England. During that, prisoners started receiving more care, a concept of rehabilitation was introduced, and governments around the world, especially in the UK and US, started reconsidering their views on solitary confinement. During the end of the 20th century, the modern prison system was finalized. The concept of probation service was introduced in 1991, and 3 years before that, the first prison intended solely for the holding of inmates in permanent isolation was formed. Those supermax prisons became widespread across the U.S., with over 40 of them being active as early as the year 2005. Inmates in those prisons are held in 23-hour-long periods of self-isolation, with occasional communal yard time, work, educational programs, and the cafeteria. But the prisons in 2020 look nothing like the intended rehabilitation facilities it was supposed to. During the Jim Crow era and post-slavery time, white supremacy skyrocketed, and this terrorized the communities of African Americans. As if the generational trauma of being black in America wasn't enough, things took a legal turn. 13th, a documentary where filmmaker Ava DuVernay explores the history of racial inequality in the U.S., focusing on the fact that the nation's prisons are disproportionately filled with African Americans, sits down with the nation's most educated lawyers, professors, and activists to discuss the prison system. In the documentary, it mentioned that laws during these times, such as voting laws, housing, and etc., relegated African Americans to a permanent second-class status. This is when activists such as MLK, Angela Davis, and etc. were trying to lead a nonviolent equality for all, especially African American, movement, but they were deemed as criminal, the word that is every black person's worst stereotype. They were seen as people who were deliberately violating the laws, even when these laws, segregation laws, got their communities hunted down and killed with no repercussion. So in their attempt to prove that as African Americans, they were something other than the visceral image of criminality, menace, and crime, these crime rates began to rise. It wasn't until the 1970s when the term mass incarceration was coined. And it was in the Nixon era when crime begins to stand in for race. The government use of dog whistling politics when referring to the war on crime showed that Nixon, rather than dealing with drug dependency and crime as a health issue, started locking up people. And these people, majority African Americans, were sent to prisons with low-level offenses and large sentences. The rhetoric for law and order pushed Nixon to wage an all-out war on urban communities and enforcing higher levels of policing in these areas. And then one of Nixon's admins officially then admitted that the war on drugs was all about throwing black people in jail. He said, the Nixon campaign in 1968 and the Nixon White House after that had two enemies, anti-war left and black people. You understand what I'm saying? We know we couldn't make it illegal to be either against the war or black, but by getting the public to associate blacks with heroin and criminalizing the communities heavily, we could arrest their leaders, raid their homes, break up their meetings, and vilify them night after night on the evening news. Did we know we were lying about the drugs? Of course we did. This hidden double meaning, which targeted more people of color, only continued to worsen. Formerly incarcerated activist, who is mentioned in the documentary, Pat Nolan, states, all of a sudden, because of Reagan's heavy crackdown on drug abuse, a scythe went through the black communities. Huge chunks of black men disappearing into prisons, and for a really long time. David Duncan, the 106th mayor of New York, also stated in the documentary, usually black and Latino were getting long sentences for possession of crack. Their white counterparts, a slap on the wrist. Okay. Information overload. Since the effects of slavery and prejudice are not over, what does that really mean? We are not in 1972, so what's that really mean for African Americans today? Faisal? Visual aid. So, when thinking of what aid to use when it came to a topic as sensitive and important like this, a presentation wouldn't cut it. So here I have my brother, Faisal, to answer a few questions. How old are you?
15.
What part of Raleigh do you live in?
Raleigh.
Okay. Have you committed a crime?
Nah.
And have you ever experienced a situation where you were racially profiled?
Yes.
Perfect. Thank you. Bye. One of those questions was definitely just took them up. According to the NAACP, African American teens represent 32% of children who are arrested. Though African American and Hispanics make up approximately 32% of the U.S., they comprise 56% of all incarcerated people. And for me, African American women have twice the imprisonment rate of white women. So, okay, we went over the effects of heavy policing on black and brown communities and what it would look like for people on the outside when they come out and if they come out. But what about on the inside? ALEC, which is an organization that funds corporations to make laws for politicians, built its reputation on being able to keep prisons filled even if people didn't commit the high-level crimes to be in prison. And if they didn't, well, they would lose their money. ALEC pushed forward a number of policies to increase the number of people in prison and to increase the sentencing of those people in prison, profiting from punishment. The prison industrial complex refers to the systems of mass incarceration and businesses who profit off mass incarceration. This includes multi-million-dollar industries that got their value from prison labor, free labor. I'm talking clothes, hats, laptops. Federal inmates are making Victoria's Secret panties, JCPenney products, Idaho potatoes, and South Carolina's furniture, you name it. The same system set in place to crack down on black and brown communities, leave them high and dry, and basically create a system of racial inequality present in every single system in our society, economic, social, political, whatever, you name it, has failed us and has just taught us that they're exploiting inmates for their free labor and punishment. Simply put, corporations are operating in prisons and profiting in punishment. It's hard to hear the same system we want to believe in has chosen money over lives, and that is a sad truth. Thank you.